so consequently, we went through a period of the last 5 years. The last 5 years of his administration were the year 2010 through 2015. And during that time frame, he reduced the funding for the military by 25%. At the same time he did that, China was increasing theirs in that same time frame by 83%. So we have China increasing their military expenditures by 83% at the same time we're reducing ours by 25%. And so we had serious problems there, and one of the areas where when people are cutting the military that they do it where it won't be as noticeable was in the flying hours. So we had pilots out there, but they weren't flying the hours that they needed to fly to keep their proficiency up. And consequently, a lot of them left and went to the airlines and went other places because they were wanting to be flying the hours, and that's one of the things, the problems that we had during that time. So we have the military's ability to recruit and retain service members that are in the shortest supply, and as I mentioned, that would be things like cyber experts and engineers and doctors. So they have the skill sets that need to be done out there, and of course, this president came along and we started rebuilding the military. I always remember being at the White House during a time that we were talking about what we're going to do with the military, and he actually looked over at me and he said, "What do you think we need to do with the military?" I said, "It's going to have to be, we have to rebuild the military. It's going to cost something like $750 billion before it's over." He said, "That's what we should do. We need to start with that." And this president, with his leadership, took us with a new priority in defending America and building our military, and it happened. So we have the things that will happen that if we don't pass this thing, the education of children for military families. There's a thing called the impact aid. Impact aid comes about when we don't have the, you don't get the tax base increased with the added enrollment into the schools, the children of military families. So they have impact because they don't pay the taxes. So the impact aid is an amount of money that it supplements that to all of it's not just in my state of Oklahoma, but throughout the country. It ensures that children of military families receive a quality education by supplementing the school districts, the budgets where they're required. If the NDAA is not passed, military construction projects. You know, I have one in my state of Oklahoma that is one that would, let's see, where is that? Yeah, we have a thing where we have an ammunition depot, a demolition shop for one, and this is something where we've gone through a lot of BRAC rounds, base realignment and closure commissions, and we have increased the size of our ammunition demolition activities substantially, and we're doing most of it now right there in Oklahoma. Well, this has a new demolition shop in there so we can get rid of a lot of these things we were not able to get rid of. So we have military construction projects in 38 states, and one happens to be in the state of Maine. And it's very significant that they be able to do these projects. If the military constructions don't happen, both an authorization and appropriation. People don't understand this because it's kind of talk around, but in order for something to get done, you have to have it authorized. That's what the committee that I chair does, authorize military projects. Then it has to be appropriated, and the appropriators come along and they put the money in there, and that's how this system works. So the NDAA, if it's not passed, the military won't be able to increase the end strength or the total number of troops in the military services. That's where they're needed to address the growing threats. End strength increases. If it doesn't happen without authorization, you can't appropriate it. So the NDAA, if it should not be passed, the Pentagon loses the ability to quickly and efficiently process security clearance investigations. Right now, there's a backlog because it takes a long time to do this, but this has a streamlining provision in it that's going to make that a lot easier. So we'll be able to get the security clearances. All these things are tied into this into this bill. The OD, if we didn't pass this thing, would lack the authority to pay the non-military personnel on hospital ships. They're the ones who are doing the great job right now with the COVID response. And that's just kind of a snapshot of what we're counting on to support our troops in the field, the bare minimum we need. Without the NDAA, we lose all of that and also lose all of the other policies. Right now is this bill makes China the primary strategic threat. I think we all understand that. We have strategic threats from Russia and China. Last year we had the European part addressed. This year, the bill that is pending right now that we're going to try to get passed for this year, and I think we will successfully do that, but that's going to be concentrating on the Pacific area. That's China, and the things that China is doing that many people don't realize the threat that's out there. Right now, we're up, as I understand it, to 7 different areas where the Chinese are actually creating islands in the South China Sea. Now, this is something that's different than has ever been done before. I've always contended it's still illegal, but they're still doing it. They're doing it, and that's what they are, the effort that they're making there. And if you go into these islands where they're rebuilding, it's almost as if China is preparing for World War III. All of them are, and this is what is happening right now. Right now we know about this solar winds hack, the hack that we're facing. That's something where we have language to deal with that in the Defense Authorization Bill. The new Hunt Forward authority that allows our cyber operators to do more work to find malicious actors proactively. And this is something that we need to get done for the safety, for the defense of our country. It implements the Cyber Solarium Commission in the recommendations. There are 27 recommendations that they have in this commission. And it establishes a new national cyber director. These are things where it's a moving target. There's a lot of things that we're doing now that we should have been doing before, and it took China and Russia to kind of forge ahead of us, as they did in the previous administration, to remind us that we have these very serious problems. So our troops need the NDAA, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they have the equipment and the training and the resources to complete the mission and return home safely. I'll close with this one reminder. On December the 29th, 1777, 243 years ago today, General George Washington wrote to the Continental Congress imploring that they need to provide the resources his troops needed. He wrote, and this is a quote from that, he said, "I hope that the supplies they will be able to furnish in aid of those which Congress may immediately import themselves will be equal and competent to every demand. If they do not, I fear I am satisfied the troops will never be in a situation to answer the public expectation and perform the duties required of them." That's just true today as it was in 1777. So we've got to do that. If we look at the national security wins of this president, I think people don't talk about that as much. We have identified China as the #1 adversary. That was in the NDS, that's the National Defense Survey. It was put together by 12 of the real experts, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. It's been the blueprint for our military ever since that time. This is about 3 years ago. And this is what and they identified China as the major threat. $2.5 trillion to rebuild the military. And that's what we were able to get done. Increase the size of the military, replace the obsolete equipment, new investments in future tech. Hypersonics is a good example. Both hypersonics, both Russia and China are ahead of us in that area of hypersonics. It's a new state of the art. the pay raise for the kids, took out the terrorist leaders. Yeah, how many people remember that? Baghdadi and Soleimani, they were the top terrorists in the world. They're gone now. This president, this administration took care of that. Established a Space Force. You know, when the Space Force, that was the first new force that was established in many, many years. I wasn't real sold on it at first because I thought we were doing a pretty good job, but it wasn't coordinated. It was, you had the different military units doing it, and they weren't really even talking to each other. So that's what we put together. That was this president that provided the leadership in doing that. The widow's tax, everybody remembers that. That was something that had to be done, and we did it. Others talked about it. This president did it. The ISIS caliphate is destroyed. The Abraham Accords, they supported Israel through the security assistance, and we know that that's going on. It's going on today. All these things this president has done, and has done a great job. But I do want to mention, and I think it's worthwhile doing, because it's we know what won't happen if we don't pass this bill. We won't get the bonuses necessary. I already mentioned that. Impact aid, I mentioned that. Military construction project authorizations, we would not have that. The full pay for DOD civilians, that has to be done, but that's been talked about by a lot of administrations, but not really done. And then I've finalized this by talking about the China. I mean, this bill supports or helps China. Nothing in the bill helps China in any way at all. There's a group called the American Enterprise Institute. It's a group, it's kind of the conservative conscience of that evaluates programs that come along. They said, and this is a quote, they said, this bill has the most substantial and consequential China-related provisions since the 2000 NDAA. Now, they're talking about this bill, what it does for China. It establishes the Pacific deterrence. Well, we talked about the European deterrence last year in the NDAA bill. This is the Pacific deterrence. That's China that we're talking about. It shifts the supply chains away from China in semiconductors, printed circuit boards, pharmaceuticals, and it stimulates the economies in those ways. It brings Chinese, the malign national security activities into light, so we know what they're doing, who the good guys are and the bad guys are. This supports Taiwan. You know, we've been doing that for a long period of time. This bill accelerates that program, prevents China's intellectual property threat, and I have a whole list here that I'd ask unanimous consent be inserted after my comments this morning.
Without objection.
And so what I'd like to wind up with, if I brought it, I did. 2 years ago, I put this card together. This was when I realized that because the media hates President Trump, people were not aware of what all of the good things that he did in those first couple of years, and people were not aware of it. First of all, on the card, and I'm just going to go ahead and run over these. The biggest tax cuts, and you know, we learned a lesson back there during a Democrat administration. John Kennedy said the best way to get more revenue in for the Great Society programs that they're advocating at that time, the best way is to reduce marginal rates, and that will increase revenue. It did. Unfortunately, John Kennedy died before he could reap the benefits that came with that. But it worked. And of course, others followed him, including Presidents Clinton, President Bush, and others, by reducing the rates. That also increased the revenue. But what this president did that was different than the rest of them, he not just increased or decreased the rates, the tax rates, but he also decreased all of the overregulation. How many people know that back during the Obama administration, we had a rule that we're adhering to that said if you are a domestic oil and gas producer in the United States of America and you're in competition with China or somebody else, you had to give them our whole playbook on how we put together our system over here, and all the elements put us at a disadvantage with our competitors in China. And in energy, you know, just look at I was happy that I used to say that after Obama got out of office, the war on fossil fuels was over for a while. And look at the energy dominance now. We're the global leader in oil and gas production. A 277% growth in crude exports, 132% increase in coal exports, a 52% increase in natural gas exports. These are exports. That's what we're doing now in the United States as a result of the efforts of this president in bringing our economy around. The crackdown on the illegal migration, you know, nobody wanted the wall, they said. Now people realize that's where a lot of the bad people were getting in. We moved the embassy. Every Democrat and Republican president in my memory tried to move the United States Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. They all talked about it. They didn't do it, so this president just went ahead and did it. He enacted the infrastructure bill, the WRDA bill, the Water Resource Development Act, the FAA reauthorization. And he had, in the judges that we have, not just Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, but I think our number's up now to about 225 new judges. He repealed the over-regulation of the Dodd-Frank rules. Anyone in business will tell you that that was one of the major things, the accomplishments of this president, President Trump. The record employment, but then I would say the one thing, the 10th and last one that I mentioned to everyone who will listen is what he did for the military. We went from the time of dropping down in the last 5 years of the Obama administration by 25%, while China was increasing 83%, now so that we have rebuilt that military. And that's why the NDAA is so significant right now, to make sure that that gets passed and that we are able to have that. And that's what this vote is all about. That's what the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, the most important bill of the year. That's why we are doing it, and that's why that's why we're here today during this holiday season. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President. Democratic whip.
We're in quorum call. I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's an unusual sighting of a senator in the Capitol between Christmas and New Year's. This is one time we really try to reserve for our personal and family responsibilities. Our family, like others, looks forward to the Christmas season. It's one time a year we desperately try to find ways to come together. Of course, COVID-19 intervened and made that more challenging. But even so, the notion of coming back to Washington this week and staying perhaps more than a day to try to finish our work is unusual, and the circumstances surrounding it are extraordinary as well. Not the least of which is the fact we have two bills that have to be thought of in context of our responsibilities. First and foremost is the National Defense Authorization Act. This month, both the House and the Senate passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma, Republican, was on the floor before me. He and Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island put in more time than most members can appreciate to make sure that this bill really served our military and the goal of national security. They came up with a good bill, one I was proud to support. This annual legislation has been signed into law for 6 consecutive decades. When the Senate fails to do anything, they always do the National Defense Authorization Bill. It shows that Congress can come together, at least on this measure, when it comes to supporting our men and women in uniform and keeping our country safe. This year, the bill authorizes $740.5 billion in defense spending. It provides another 3% well-deserved pay raise for our troops. It also recognizes that many in the armed forces are on the front lines here at home as well, helping fight the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic, providing our troops with necessary benefits and protections, including a 10% increase in hazardous duty pay. The bill also includes a number of provisions that I authored and supported, including language expressing strong support for the Baltic states and Ukraine, especially in the face of continued, unforgivable Russian aggression. It requires the renaming of military bases in the United States, which were once named in honor of Confederate generals, those who served in the Confederacy in an attempt to secede from the Union and to defend the institution of slavery have been enshrined in the names of these bases for many, many years. This effort to rename them is long, long overdue. It tries to correct and recognize the mistakes of our past and really address the sensitive racial inequities at the Pentagon when it comes to this decision-making. It places restrictions on the transfer of military equipment to law enforcement agencies. We have to address the issue of militarization of our police at a time when we are, frankly, making an assessment of the role of police to make certain that the overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers who are good, principled, civic-minded individuals are honored, and those who fail to meet the test are removed from service. It expands benefits to our veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. There are 191,000 Vietnam-era veterans in my state of Illinois. Many of them were exposed to toxins such as Agent Orange during their service and now are paying the price. It makes it easier for victims of military sexual trauma to report instances of such crime and expand support for survivors. The most recent horrible incident at Fort Hood was a reminder of what we need to do to bring the military into the 21st century when it comes to respecting the rights of all people, men and women. It strengthens safeguards against foreign cyber attacks. We know how important that is after the recent revelation, confirmed by Secretary of State Pompeo, that Russia is at work again, attempting to compromise our federal agencies, their data, their information, and the security secrets that they keep for our protection. It authorizes funding for PFAS-related research. If you've never heard the phrase PFAS before, I can tell you you're bound to hear it in the future. This was used as a flame retardant and in some other capacities on many Air Force bases and military bases around the United States. We're finding it's still there and it's still dangerous. We need to put money into remediation to help these military installations, including Scott Air Force Base in Belleville, Illinois, where PFAS was detected earlier this year. Still, despite all the good things in this bill, the bipartisanship that supported it, President Trump decided to veto the bill. one of his rare vetoes. He prefers we continue to honor the Confederate leaders who committed treasonous atrocities in order to preserve slavery. I don't think that is reflective of the United States of today or its values, but that's his position. And when he was called out for this racist inclination, he changed the reasoning for his veto. He claims the bill didn't do enough to fight China, or that we should include a measure to address liability issues for tech companies. Never mind that tech company liability matters have nothing to do with the National Defense Authorization Act. He just doesn't like that there's criticism coming down for some of the misstatements and lies and disinformation he's been spreading on social media. The President also fails to recognize that this defense authorization bill, in fact, does get tough on China, creates a new Pacific deterrence initiative that puts America back in the seat of leadership in that region where we need to be. The Trump administration could have started this initiative on its own. They did not. So Congress stepped up and created this security partnership because the White House was asleep at the wheel. At the end of the day, I suppose we can't expect anything more from a president who has denigrated our troops by calling them suckers and losers. I voted to support the fiscal year 21 NDAA. I'll support it again to override this president's unforgivable and reckless veto. I'm glad the House did so on Monday. I hope we in the Senate do the same. Coming back to Washington was not something I looked forward to this week. I wanted to stay home. But I knew when it came to funding our troops, I had to be here. Many of my colleagues feel the same. I hope tomorrow we can take that up quickly. Then there was the drama around the COVID-19 relief bill. It was hard to describe what we went through in the last week to 10 days with messages from the White House. I wish that the President and those around him advising him would have called to mind the 335,000 Americans who've lost their lives due to this deadly pandemic, and many more who've lost a family member, a friend, or a loved one. In Illinois, we've lost 16,000 lives to COVID-19. Tragic, historic, and I extend my deepest condolences to the friends and families of those who've died or are fighting this virus. Many are my friends. More than 121,000 Americans spent last night in a hospital, a grim new record of hospitalization, as our heroic nurses and doctors face unrelenting stress from this crisis. I just think as I reflect on the interviews with these men and women who are on the front line of healthcare, how stoic they usually are, how controlled they usually are, and how they're losing it now. The overwhelming numbers that they're facing, the terrible prospect of someone dying with a member of their family unable to even enter the room on the last minutes of their life. It's got to be heartbreaking on a scale that none of us can imagine. But think about doing that every single day. They've done it. And I tell you, we will never be able to repay them with our gratitude. They are true American heroes. Many of us returned to Washington this week. As I said, celebrating the holidays in a fashion like never before, social distancing, Zooms, FaceTime, calls with family and loved ones. It's no substitute for the kids being there to open the gifts on Christmas morning, but it's the reality of what we face today. There is some hope on the horizon, and though I've been critical many times of the Trump administration, I do want to give the President credit for the Warp Speed program. It is amazing as I read the stories of what they were able to achieve in discovering not more than one, I hope, and more than 2 vaccines that can treat Americans and people around the world, keep them safe as they face this coronavirus. We broke all the records in the discovery of these vaccines, and as I read about it, I am continued to be grateful and want to make sure America recognizes the doctors, the scientists, the researchers. Barney Graham, I didn't know his name until yesterday, and it came out in a story published in the New Yorker. He works at the National Institute of Health. He's given a great deal of credit for the breakthrough in the first 2 vaccines that have been approved, and others just like him. I want to salute Dr. Francis Collins at the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Anthony Fauci, both of whom have become my friends over the years, and what a job they've done for America. So many more deserve recognition, and I hope there'll be an opportunity to give it to them. But the fact is, these doses of vaccines are starting to move across the country. In last week, Illinois, I'm proud to say, led the nation. I congratulated our governor, J.B. Pritzker, yesterday. More than 100,000 healthcare workers received their first shots last week. I asked him why we led, and he said, I don't know. We just put together our own program of distribution, and it worked. Thank goodness it did. Lives will be saved because of it. But there's so much more to do. Progress in administering the vaccine has been slow, as we still struggle to reach the hardest hit areas, and the rosy projections from the administration have not come to fruition yet. But the fact is, we have 2 viable vaccines. That is miraculous. I look forward to the new administration, the Biden administration's new management of this effort, and I'm glad Congress came together to pass a relief bill, which included $30 billion for vaccine development and distribution. When the president said he wasn't going to sign this bill, I thought, how can he say that? He should be taking credit, rightfully, for the Warp Speed program and his role in seeing that program move forward, instead of complicating the distribution of the vaccine by threatening to veto the bill. Fortunately for us, in the end, he signed the bill. On Sunday evening, the president signed the bipartisan annual spending bill and the COVID-19 relief bill. There were complaints about the size of the bill. Well, the entire federal budget was included in that bill, as well as the COVID-19 relief undertaking, as well as many other bills, such as the Water Resources Development Act. All of these are major pieces of legislation. They were combined in one bill that went way beyond 5,000 pages. Unfortunately, the president delayed in signing the bill and created needless uncertainty in America, particularly among the unemployed and others who are suffering from this public health and economic crisis. This agreement provides much needed support for many of them, and they'll have some delay in receiving their checks because of the president's period of indecision. Enhanced unemployment benefits at $300 a week and an extension of the unemployment program created under the CARES Act through March 14th will bring real relief to many millions of families. $325 billion, possibly the largest single item in the COVID relief bill, went to provide our nation's ailing small businesses another chance at survival. The Paycheck Protection Program worked in the initial CARES Act. It was renewed in this undertaking. An extension of the federal eviction moratorium through January 2021, coupled with $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, will literally mean that people are not evicted right after Christmas. Approximately $850 million is going to Illinois to help keep families in their homes during this pandemic. The 15% increase in nutrition assistance is certainly needed. It goes through the SNAP program, which was historically known as food stamps, to make sure that families do have something on the table. I can tell you, I woke up this morning in Springfield, Illinois, to look at the front page newspaper to learn that an anonymous donor had given our local food bank $500,000. And the people of the food bank were, of course, appreciative and said they desperately needed it in my hometown and in towns all across America. So this increase in food stamp assistance is long overdue, and I'm glad it was included. The bill included a number of important measures, but we have to go to work to make sure that we deal with the short-term emergency response to this bill, but do more. We address the needs to meet the needs of the pandemic immediately, but more will follow. It was a tough negotiation and honest compromise. I was happy to be part of a bipartisan group of senators who may have got the ball rolling, at least we think we did, and handed it over to the leaders to finish the job. I think what we achieved on a bipartisan basis was largely included in the final bill, and it addressed the major elements that were necessary. One of the most important items that Congress failed to reach an agreement on was funding for state and local governments. States and localities are struggling with increased costs and decreased revenues due to the pandemic. By this summer, my home state of Illinois will have lost more than $5 billion in revenues. I can tell you that that's going to cause pain and cutbacks. This is not money that was lost in our pension system, which has its own share of troubles, but money that is directly attributable to the downturn in revenues because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It isn't just happening in Illinois, it's happening all around the country, in red and blue states, our neighboring state of Kentucky to the south of us, facing the same hardships we are. Federal funding for states and localities needs to be done for our great cities and great states that are struggling. And I certainly hope that the next president, when he's sworn in January 20th, will take this up as one of his highest priorities. Our nation's economic recovery is slowed down by budget cuts that will be necessary in states and localities because of this cutback in revenues. Now, the most widely discussed measure of the COVID-19 relief bill was the second round of economic impact payments. Just yesterday, the House of Representatives passed the CASH Act, a measure that would increase the direct payments to individuals, adults and children, from $600 to $2,000 for those who are earning less than $75,000 a year. The measure passed in the House by a vote of 275 to 174. Over the past several months, we've heard time and again from economists that we run the risk of doing too little that far outweighs the risk of doing too much when it comes to this economic recovery. The head of the Federal Reserve, Chairman Powell, has really instructed us to keep the foot on the accelerator so that our economy doesn't slump into a recession. At a time when so many American families are laid off, unemployed, and simply struggling to get by, there is nothing more invigorating to the economy than to have a cash infusion. Those with limited resources, battling to pay bills, turn around and spend that money quickly. They don't solder it away for some future rainy day. They need it now, and that's why we should seriously consider this. By passing this enhanced measure, we could restore the American public confidence in Washington in the fact that we are listening and working together on a bipartisan basis to respond. This measure that passed the House of Representatives has the support of the President, Speaker Pelosi, House Democrats, as well as many House Republicans. Leader Schumer and my Senate Democratic colleagues support it, so I hope Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, and his colleagues in the Republican caucus will join us and allow us to pass this bill quickly this week. Let's step up to the plate and get this done. The American people have waited too long for this relief. I, for one, am proud of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for coming together and passing a meaningful relief bill. But the time for patting one another on the back is over. Let's finish the job. Let's make sure that we have this authorization bill for the Department of Defense and that we come to the rescue of our families across America who need defense against the vagaries of this pandemic and this economy. We can finally see a slight glimmer of a light at the end of this tunnel. If we want to address the needs of Americans in crisis, it starts with passing this legislation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. President,
The Senate Majority Leader is recognized.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, for the information of all senators, we'll have a live quorum call at 5 p.m. tomorrow, followed immediately by a roll call vote on proceeding to the veto message on the NDAA. So senators should be on the floor at that time. Again, that's 5 p.m. tomorrow. I understand there are 2 bills at the desk, and I ask for their first reading in block.
The clerk will read the title of the bills for the first time.
S5085, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to increase the additional 2020 recovery rebates and so forth and further purposes. HR 9051, an act to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to increase recovery rebate amounts and so forth and for other purposes.
I now ask for a second reading, and I object to my own request, all in block.
Objection having been heard, the bills will receive their second reading on the next legislative day.
I ask unanimous consent when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 3 p.m. Wednesday, December 30th. Further, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. Finally, following leader remarks, Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak their end for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
So if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask to stand adjourned under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 3 p.m. tomorrow.